It's probably one of our least publicized lectures. We had kind of a last-minute shifting around, but we're very excited to have Leighann Martin, who also is collaborating on our new exhibit, the Tarpon Era. So if you haven't been in the museum yet, we've got 3 more panels to add, hopefully by the time we open up on Thursday. We've got some pretty neat artifacts also associated with the exhibit, and Leighann was nice enough to kind of do the scientific aspect of the exhibit of what's going on with the tarpon now. So the Tarpon Era exhibit actually kind of chronicles from when tarpon fishing became very popular and was the main activity of the town in the late 1800s, or about 1870, and till the 1950s, where they kind of disappeared. And that's actually, Leighann's going to talk a little bit about maybe one of the reasons why that happened. So Leighann is a graduate, student at University of Texas Marine Science Institute. She's a master's student about to graduate, and she is about to go embark on a new pathway to try to work in policy in Washington, D.C. So pretty exciting. So she's been here on and off for 4 years. She's pretty excited about her next move to D.C. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Leighann.
All right, thank you. So this is basically the first chapter of my thesis that I'm going to be presenting in August, which is looking at how Atlantic tarpon recover from catch and release angling. But to first start, tarpon and Port Aransas have a really big history together, which is really where this project started from. So as you can see, this is Port Aransas here nowadays. But in the early 1800s, this is the Tarpon Inn in the early 1800s. And as you can see, it's a lot smaller of a town back then. The Tarpon Inn was started as a hotel for workers when they were building the jetty, and then it became the hotel that it is today. And basically, tarpon, because there's so much tarpon to fish here. And Port Aransas actually used to be called Tarpon, Texas. So before, tarpon used to be caught and brought in. They were not catch and release. They were made into trophies, as you can see here. And one of the most famous person to come and fish here in Port Aransas was FDR. And FDR was on the Farley boats in this picture, caught a tarpon. But interestingly, while he was here, he signed a lot of papers into legislation and even wrote a letter to Adolf Hitler apologizing for the burning of the Hindenburg. So interesting stuff while he was here. And some of you guys may know in the summer we have the Deep Sea Roundup, but before the Deep Sea Roundup was the Tarpon Rodeo. And this happened every year until the early 1960s, I believe. And this was around the same time when there was a steep decline in the tarpon population. So basically, we start this project on wondering, where did the tarpon go? They say in the mid to late 1950s there was a steep decline, and no one's really sure of what happened. So if you don't know, so Atlantic tarpon are a prized sports fish here in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Atlantic Ocean. And something that's really unique about them is that they're one of the only marine air-breathing species. So we don't really know what that means for them in catch and release. And since they're now a catch and release only species, we want to really know what that means for them. So recreational angling is really important to the Gulf of Mexico. It's a $7 billion industry. And for the state of Texas, it's worth $1.2 billion. So it's really important to the state of Texas, but also to our own town here in Port Aransas. But catch and release angling is also an intense stress for fish. I like to say when you run a marathon, you're going to be exhausted. That's how they feel when they're being reeled in. So they're really tired when you release them, and this can lead to a greater chance of predation upon release. And the bigger a fish, they're going to have a higher magnitude of injury. And this is really important when Atlantic tarpon get to be about 7 feet long. So the larger fish are older and they have a harder time to recover from this stress. So, and everything that you do while you're reeling them in, the type of line you're using, how long you handle them, how long you keep them out of water, the type of hook you're using, all of that compounded is going to create an even greater stress for these fish. So as you can see by this little arc over here, that's just showing you all those compounding factors are increasing the stress, and then that increases the time it takes for them to recover and get back to their normal behavior that they should be exhibiting in the water. And just to prove to you, there are all these graphs on the right, and you can see that when there's increased stress, like exercise, they're going to have increased lactate buildup and glucose, and this is going to be similar just to if you and I were exercising. When the next day you're tired and you're sore, that's the buildup of lactate in your body, and the fish have the same experience. So, like I mentioned before, they're a unique species because they can breathe air, and they can actually go up to the surface and gulp air because they have this air-breathing organ shown here. But one thing that we don't know is if this behavior is necessary for them to survive, or if it's something that they need to do under an opportunity, like if they're under low oxygen, or if they're trying to recover from a catch and release event. So they can breathe like a normal fish through their gills, but they can also utilize this air-breathing organ. And in this picture here, you can see that red spongy layer in the middle, that's their air-breathing organ, and it has the chance for a lot of blood to flow through it, and it can absorb a lot more oxygen that way. Now, there are only 2 species of tarpon, Pacific and Atlantic. The Pacific tarpon have a lot more scientific research done on them, and they are known opportunistic air breathers. So they are known to do this under stressful situations like low oxygen. But Atlantic tarpon have had lots of different debates on this. We really don't know what's happening with them yet, so that's one thing we really wanted to learn about. And the main research goal for all of this is to determine if catch and release angling regulations are appropriate for tarpon based on this unique behavior, for them to be able to air breathe. Maybe they need something different because of this. So the first part of my project was really, how do I even find tarpon? So like I said, they get up to 7 feet long. We can't house that at MSI. Can't really take a 7-foot tarpon and bring them into our lab. So we needed to find juvenile and subadult tarpon. And when I first took this job and took this project, I thought I would be out doing, deep sea fishing, thought I would be having a great time, but actually they're in ditches. And so they're in these pretty disgusting areas for them to live, but it allows for them to hide from predators and allows them to make it to that adult stage. So this water is pretty gross, as you can see. It's really low oxygen and not a lot of water movement. So we found where they are, had to figure out how to catch for them. We'll see if my videos work. But basically, oh no. This was a very funny video of me trying to learn how to cast net. I got a lot better at it, and so I cast netted for them for small juveniles, and I seined them with my lab to get the subadults. So on the top we have the juvenile, which are about 4-inch long, and on the bottom we have the subadults, which are about 1 foot long. And so I had 3 main research questions that I wanted to answer with this project. The first one is, do tarpon need to breathe air in order to survive? And then furthermore, does exercise stimulate this air breathing behavior? And can it aid their recovery from this exhaustive exercise? So first we had to determine if it was something that is necessary for them to live or if they only did it under opportunities. So I first did this in a series 1 where I filmed them air breathing in a stepwise decrease of oxygen saturation from 100% to 10%. And I filmed them for 15 minutes. But then we wanted to see them for longer periods of time, so we did 100% oxygen and 20% oxygen for an hour long. And unfortunately, my videos aren't working, but you would have seen here this juvenile tarpon go up to the surface and take a gulp of air and then release air bubbles as it's breathing. So on the left, we have series 1, which shows breaths per minute on the y-axis and the oxygen saturation stepwise decreasing from 100% to 10% oxygen. And there wasn't anything significant because it was we had such little resolution with the 15-minute intervals, which is why we then chose to look at hour-long videos with the 20% and 100%. And if we were to, if these were breathers that needed it to survive, you would expect them to breathe the same rate at 100% oxygen, fully saturated, and 20% oxygen of low oxygen. But we don't see that. We see that they're increasing their breathing rates a lot under this stressful low oxygen environment, which means that they're only doing this for opportunity. They're not doing this to survive under any normal condition. So then we wanted to look at, see if exercise is going to stimulate this air breathing behavior. And we have the same graph on the right, which was the 120% oxygen breaths per hour. And then we also did this study with pre-exercise, which is just them in the 100% oxygen water, just living. And then I exercised them by pinching its tail until it was exhausted, placed it back in there, filmed it for another hour, and you don't see any increase in their air breathing behavior. So it's not increasing their air breathing behavior. And then just to see if there was any difference, we placed them in the low oxygen 20% saturation after exercise as well. And you see it's basically the same as the 20% pre-exercise. So we can determine from these experiments that exercise isn't stimulating this behavior, only this low oxygen environment. But that doesn't mean that it's not aiding the recovery from exercise. So that's what we wanted to know next. So I had a control, where they just sit in the chambers that I let them recover in, and I just, without exercising them, let them sit in there for 36 hours. And then for the ones that I wanted to exercise, I chased them in a tank, once again, pinching their tails, and let them circle around for 5 minutes, which was about how long it took for them to be exhausted. And these are the about foot-long subadult juveniles. And so then I would let them recover for a certain time point, 0, 1, and 4 hours. And like I said, we want to see if air breathing has a role in this recovery. So then we took half of them to have access to air, and half of them were cut off access to air. So they just had to breathe through their gills rather than using their air breathing organ. And this would help us tease apart to see if air breathing is playing a role. And from them, I took their blood and white muscle. So then we looked at a few different blood parameters. This osmotic pressure on the top is essentially looking at a stress indication. So this will tell you that if it's increased from the control, you'll know that they're stressed. We see that trend here on top, and the hematocrit is essentially looking at how much red blood cell is in the blood, but there's no differences for either one of these. So this could mean that this is just not a good parameter to see if they're stressed, or maybe they're not stressed. So we had to go into more analyses to look at this further. So on top, we have the plasma pH of the blood, and then on the bottom is the red blood cell pH. And you can see after the controls, at 0 hour and at the 1 hour time points, both the plasma and the blood have decreased pH, which is a sign of stress. But by 4 hours, they're back to the normal control levels. So this is indicating that they could be recovered by 4 hours. But then when we look on the right panel, we have the green is no access to air, and the blue is access to air. There's no significant differences in between these parameters, so we know that both the 1 and 4 hour have no difference with the access to air. And then we looked at the muscle pH to also see if there was any differences there. We see a really similar graph to what we saw in the blood pH. It's decreased at 0 and 1 hour and back to control levels by 4. And there's no significant difference between the access to air or not. And then finally, we looked at the muscle lactate. And you can see that the lactate was built up immediately after exercise and persisted and increased through 1 hour. But by 4 hours, this lactate was back to control levels. And there was once again no difference in between the access to air or not. So what we can conclude from all of these studies were that tarpon are opportunistic air breathers. They're doing this under low oxygen environments, like those gross ditches that I find them in. And exhaustive exercise is not stimulating this air breathing behavior, and it doesn't aid them in recovery from exhaustive exercise. So this is really good news for fishermen, because they have this unique ability to air breathe, but it's not changing any way that we should manage them. We can manage them just like we would any other water breathing species like red drum. And this is really good for everyone else. So you know how to catch them. You can release them just like you would any other red drum. And with that, I want to thank everyone in my lab and my funding sources. Without this, none of it would have been possible. And I can take any questions. Yes. So a lot of the small juveniles, the 4 inches, those are mostly found in fully freshwater, and the subadults were found in brackish water. So that would be a further study. I won't be doing this, but my lab's going to continue looking on seeing what the salinity differences is happening with them and what causes that and how they can tolerate it. Yes. I think it would be excreted just like they excrete any of the other unnecessary nutrients. It shouldn't affect anything really because they're able to live in it. I don't know their actual pathways of excreting it, but it's probably just fine for them because they're all living in these disgusting silty waters. Yes? Yes, so one of my other studies is looking at red drums, small, like the sizes I used here, and then large slot size ones. And throughout the literature and from my other studies, you can tell that the larger the fish is, they're going to have a bigger magnitude of injury, and it takes a little bit longer for them to recover. So we know that if these subadults are able to recover by 4 hours, most likely the big adults will either be recovered by then or have a little bit longer recovery time. They're out in the open water, but a lot of people say that they are near shore. There are a lot of tarpon caught in Florida, in the Florida Keys, and in the Grand Caymans. But there is some tarpon found here too. Yes, Bill. Yes, Bill. So the young juveniles that I've been catching them in, that water is really oxygen depleted. So yes, and I think that's where this evolution came from, for this ability to have this air breathing behavior. But they can use it as adults too. There's just really not a lot of studies shown on adults because they are migratory and it's hard to get to them. So there's very little study on adults. Yes. So they're there naturally. So it's not ponds, they're all like creeks that connect to larger bodies of water. They believe that tarpon are spawning offshore and the larvae from currents go into these brackish and these fresher waters, and that's where they settle and grow up to be these more adult, subadults. Oh, no, sorry, they're here in Port Aransas and in Aransas Pass is where we catch a lot of them. So like any of these small waters that you see, there could be tarpon in there. Yes. I know that there has been some tagging studies done in the Bahamas. There's the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust that has started to do a lot of research with tarpon, and I know they're doing that. They do a lot of non-lethal studies with them, which is really great, but there isn't a ton of really readily published data on that yet. Yes. There is a large population over there, so I wouldn't be surprised if there have been spawning there. But I don't know if that's just one population of tarpon or if that's where all of them go. I just saw today a study was saying that some of them are highly migratory, so I don't know if there are different spawning aggregations. All right, well, thank you guys so much.
How's that? Okay. My name is Bill Behrens. I'm Secretary of the Board of Directors, and I invited myself to introduce Cliff. Probably most of you know Cliff. He's been around for about a year, a little bit more than a year. He took the place of Rick Pratt, who was the former and first director of the Port Aransas Museum. Cliff is now the director of all PAPHA endeavors, including the museum and the Rick Pratt School of Boat Building, also known as the Farley Boat Works. When Rick told us he was going to retire, none of us listened because we didn't want to hear that. But he kept telling us that, and so we really had to listen to him. So finally, somebody told me round up some possible replacements. So I did. I got a list of people who wanted the job. Rather impressive list. Some